guys. How's everybody doing this morning? So I am going to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Adrienne. I am the political director for SwingLeft, and about how I got here. I know many of the folks here in this room don't need to hear some of the things that I'm going to tell you today, but I think it's important we talk about it so we can pass that message along to others who need the inspiration. So I'm going to start by telling you a story, and that story starts in November of last year, 2016, when I was in Ohio knocking on doors. I was working in a town, a small rural town in the northeastern part of the state called Findlay. This town is appropriately nicknamed Flag City. You can take that and run with that in your imagination. We were walking and knocking on doors. It was about 6:30 at night, and I was tired, and it was raining, and I was ready to go home, but I pushed myself and encouraged myself to walk and knock on one more door. And I got to the door of this woman whose name was Linda, and she opened the door in pajamas and fluffy slippers and an NRA t-shirt, and I thought to myself, this conversation is not going to go in my direction. And I started to talk to her, and she asked me, she said, I don't like either of the candidates. I don't think I'm going to vote, but I know that Hillary is going to take my guns away. And I said, that's not true. And we talked about it for a second. And by the end of this short conversation, we walked to the polls, and she voted right before the polls closed. And since that moment, I have not been able to stop thinking about Linda and what I might have done if I had been able to knock 10 more doors, or if I had had 10 people with me to knock 100 more doors. Imagine what we could have done if we'd had 1,000. So after I left Ohio and went back to New York City, where I live, I asked myself, how do we make a difference now? And I recognized that the problem was that I wasn't ready to run back to rural Ohio. I wanted to go back to my life, but I also knew that we couldn't wait until election year of 2020 to get involved again. I knew it was too dire to wait another 4 years before we make a difference. I personally am an embodiment of our geography problem. People like me, activists who want to get involved and who want to do something, often live in bluer districts that are already represented by Democrats and are safe, and we don't know how to channel our energy into the places and the tactics that are going to be most effective for making a difference. So that is why SwingLeft formed. We formed SwingLeft so that we could address this specific challenge and help people funnel their energies into the places and to the actions that would matter most for 2018. We knew that if we all stayed and worked in our home districts that we wouldn't be able to make the difference that we needed to make in this election cycle. So forming SwingLeft, getting people to go to districts that are important and targeting specific races is not exactly a new concept. As my Ohio story suggests, presidential campaigns have been doing this for a long time. We run off to Ohio or to Iowa to knock on doors, especially in the final days before the election. And that is because people from Chicago, New York, we all know that what happens in a swing state impacts all of us. But for some reason, we tend to forget that when we talk about congressional races. We think of these races as local, and we don't give them the time and attention that presidential or even Senate races get. And that means we certainly don't flock to them, to these swing districts, in the way that we flock to swing states. So, we think about these races as local, but truthfully, these races are not local. From everything from gun control to immigration to healthcare, we know that congressmen and women are making decisions every day in the House of Representatives that are impacting all of our lives, and not just the lives of the people who live in their districts. So while these races may seem local in nature, their implications are incredibly national and at scale. By taking back the House this year, and I know that I don't have to tell this to all of you in the room, that is why you're here, but we know that we can put a serious check on the Trump agenda, and we can regain a voice in our government again. And taking back the House this year is within reach. I believe I have some slides here. So the first thing is that we all have a swing district in driving distance. We know that we need 23 seats to take back the House, and SwingLeft has identified 78 competitive districts that we are working on. What's more is we only need a few votes to win these districts, because these districts are won on incredibly tight margins. I'm gonna flip through these. So in New York's 22nd district, GOP rep Claudia Tenney won by slightly over 15,000 votes. Here in Illinois, Roscom won by 64,000 votes. These may seem like big numbers, but when you talk about the full electorate of people who are voting in these elections, they are very small. That margin in New York is 5.5%. So we know that we can make a difference in these elections by just turning out a few thousand voters, and by more door knockers at the doors, more people having these conversations, we can make that happen. The landscape is also shifting dramatically this year because of Republican retirements. This is incredibly exciting. This used to be animated, which gives it a lot more oomph, but you can see that in 2016, we had 13. We're now actually at 41 retirements. And this is incredibly important because incumbents tend to run at a 7-point advantage against non-incumbents. And that percentage difference means that they can stay safe even in wave elections like we saw in 2010 and like we're hoping to see this year. But as these Republicans retire, it changes the margins, and it means that we can focus on districts that we never would have thought possible, like Wisconsin's first, with Paul Ryan deciding that he is going to leave. Everybody is excited about that one. Like Virginia's 5th, which we just, of course, this week had another retirement. And all of these, of course, I won't be too gleeful amidst a lot of scandal. So that brings us back to our theory of change. At SwingLeft, we need to flip 23 actually, after Connor Lamb's race, 23 seats, and the wins are in our favor. But in order to make sure that this happens, we know that we need to be focused on the places and the actions that are going to be most effective at hitting that 23 number. The secret, as I mentioned before, is that we all have a swing district in driving distance, and so we don't have to go back to Ohio or to a swing state in order to make a difference this year. So at SwingLeft, we have identified 3 key pillars to flipping these critical districts, to working on these 78 competitive races across the country, and to flipping these districts in order to take back a majority in the House. The first is grassroots fundraising, even though it's in the middle. We are raising as much money as possible early because we know we're seeing an incredibly exciting year. We have Democrats coming out of the woodwork to run in primary elections, lots of exciting, diverse candidates, and that's amazing for democracy. It is also very scary because it means that after a competitive, sometimes bloody primary, our Democratic candidates are facing a Republican incumbent who has been sitting on the sidelines, amassing cash, getting their campaign team ready to hit the ground running, and then face our candidate who is broke and tired and doesn't have the resources they need to win in the general election. So we're raising this money early now so that we can have the infrastructure ready to support them the minute they get out of the primary, which means we get to support competitive primaries, but also make sure we're ready to win in November. So we are doing this through lots of different creative tactics. We have built grassroots fundraising pages, which allow people to raise Kickstarter, this is them, Kickstarter pages that where people can raise money, and people across the country have been getting together to host these house parties where they raise $20, $30 from their friends and family. They've hosted game nights and cocktail parties with creative cocktails like impeachment drinks. And everything that you can think of. It's been incredible to see these activists all over the country coming up with creative fundraising and voter engagement opportunities. So people are raising through these personalized fundraising pages. That's also allowed us to raise over now $4 million for swing district candidates across the country. Which is not a small number to be able to hand over to them to start these races. And so we've had the pleasure now of the past couple of months, as the primaries have started, handing these candidates big, funny foam checks through our volunteers, which are signed from the grassroots. And as you can see in this photo, the Kasten campaign here in Illinois received that check and then drove back home from the volunteer party with it and posted it on Twitter, which we were all very excited. He made a joke about the Happy Gilmore moment, which I shamefully did not understand. So this number, again, is old. We've raised over 4 million now, and even more through SwingLeft allies. So the next thing in these slides, I apologize, are out of order, is voter contact. We know that money is not enough, that in order to win, we need to get more Democrats who support our values to turn out to vote on Election Day, and nothing is more important than face-to-face conversations in doing that. So even though we're not endorsing in the primaries, we have already our volunteers have already hosted thousands of voter contact events all over the country. They're raising money through these grassroots fundraising pages. They're also knocking on doors and registering voters and collecting pledges and doing the hard work of building up the infrastructure for the general. It's laying a groundwork so that we can have basically a border state but border district program for these congressional districts, so that at the end of the primaries, we hand these campaigns not just volunteers, but skilled, experienced volunteers who are ready to volunteer themselves, but also help intake the wave of new activists who we know are going to want to show up a week before the election. And that infrastructure is important to help them, especially since many of these congressional campaigns are small and understaffed and don't have a ton of organizers on the ground to intake people coming in from out of district in the way that a presidential campaign would. As the primaries end, we're coordinating directly with these campaigns, which means that we can give volunteers the most strategic ways to get involved, because rather than having a national organization like ours try to dictate what lists to call and which scripts to use, we defer to those campaigns. Our volunteers are integrated directly into them so that they can use their time as effectively as possible. And lastly, our third pillar here is cultural mobilization, because at the end of the day, I give up on these slides. At the end of the day, the midterm election is still not getting the attention that it deserves. We know we need more. Our goal is to get everyone talking a bit about the midterms this year in the way that they would a presidential. This year should be big, if as big as a presidential, if not bigger than a presidential cycle. So we're going to be working with politicians, political leaders, celebrities, activists, artists, anyone else, anyone who wants to help us spread this message about how important the midterms are this year. We know that this is not going to be easy. We know that we can't take anything for granted. The polls are up and down. Just a few months ago, one of the slides I had in here had us up plus 10. We are now plus 4. That could change again in a month. We cannot take anything for granted. Only 36% of eligible voters turned out in 2014 midterms, so we know that we still have a pervasive turnout problem that we need to tackle. And what this all comes down to is that I know I don't have to convince anybody here in the room of this, but if you are talking to people who think this blue wave is inevitable and that we are set this year, please ask them to think back on where they were in November 2016 and how they felt and what they were doing and what more they could have done to change the outcome. And then ask them to take that anxiety and that angst and that anger and funnel it into action, because we need that this year. And they can do that by going to a swing district near them, and we're here to help.